Very good. We're going to begin the second presentation of this afternoon of productive sustainability in the meat section. We want to remind you that this will be given by Emilio Martínez, and you can give your questions or your comments in the button that you have available in your screen through the chat. And all of the questions will be answered by the speaker at the end of the presentation. So enjoy his presentation so that you can be attentive and you can make all the questions that you want to. Please take advantage to ask all the questions you need. The applied research is one of the goals to have a sustainable production. Throughout this long direct work of the different size farms, we're going to leave you with Emilio Martínez Garbino. He is the vice president of the Meat Corporation. He is a veterinarian. He has a PhD in the animal nutrition from the University of Queensland, who's going to talk about the results of the beef production based on dairy mare cows in the southern part, which is how to be competitive in the rearing finishing process to achieve export quality meat. Dr. Martínez. Thank you, Veronica, for your presentation. I also want to thank the Meat Corporation for this day and to be able to let you know what we are doing in each of all of our partners that we have in this area, and also the research that we have been doing in this aspect that we have impulsed for the meat production. I want to congratulate the FIOSU to keep us connected with our agriculture area, which today, as a tradition, is in virtual platform, and I'm sure that this will be a very positive day and it will be useful in the future. In our meat production at national level, which has been strongly influenced by what has to do with the dairy sector. We know the importance that the dairy sector has had and the advances that they had, the intensification and the growth of the different farms, especially on Los Ríos, Los Lagos, and the south of Chile. And this also helps them to have the meat production that we don't see in many different parts of the country, especially in those where we have in our continent, which are countries which are merely meat production of specialized breeds. So therefore, we have to what is happening in England, for instance, in part in Ireland, where the importance of the herd, of the dairy herd, is very, very important. So when we look, we can see what we all know. We have had a very huge decrease in our herd in a very sustainable way. It's something that we have to revert. And this is the big concern that we have as part of the research, but also should also become involved and to be able to have a more ambitious development of the livestock production, in which in the long term which would include different aspects. And one of the weakness that we have in our meat chain, which we all know, I don't know if it's a consequence of the low production or the low profits. I really don't know. I think that we have a low production in our farms because it has mainly to do with the low profit, especially in the rearing part and also the rearing of the dairy males, because all of this, what it involves inside the dairy farms. There has been a lot of forecasts, which means the innovation inside of this production process, or maybe we don't have the replacements for this. Another aspect which limits the development of this is there's a very low productive change, commercial change. It has to do with the prior was presenting not too long ago. gives us a ray of light of hope to be able to see these products so that it can, at the end of the process, we will have a real good productive chain. We need to work on this. We need to have trust in our reliability from our producers and also the final processes, which would allow us today, starting from the work that we are doing that the agricultural and livestock service have done by identifying the individuals. And obviously, it's something that would be profitable for everybody who is involved in the procurement initiatives. I think it is something that is very, very positive. Slaughtering houses have raised their technological levels. They have made a lot of investments. Looking at the future, looking at the export, which today has given certain results for the industry in general, but also for them, which is something very positive. Very high technological industry, which allows us to comply with the demands of the exporting countries with the help like Chile that we heard this morning, but also allowed to get with high technological products. But we also know that on our shelves, we have a different barrier, which is something very complex for our development. Exporters. So therefore, there is a barrier in the value chain of the meat production here in Chile, and it puts a roof. And this roof, we have to look at it today with, it looks like a very difficult scenario. We don't know if this is the way it will be in the future with the prices, or we're going to have the tendency that we had before the pandemic in our country. So therefore, this is a point that we need to look at it in a positive way. We are going to be able to occupy this space in an international market, but also have the alternative to have access to international markets, which would allow us to escape the problem of the price that we've been seeing in our national market, domestic market. There's also an increase of the meat, which has to do with but there is a high increase of the consuming of the red meat per capita in the development countries. And one of the characteristics that I mentioned on the previous slide was the high tendency of the biotypes of our dairy farms. This obligates us, if we want to pass all of the other barriers, the commercial barriers, which are the characteristics of our meat chain, it obligates us to be able to develop business models which can be attractive, so that we can insert these dairy calves as efficiently as possible. And this is an element, I'm interested that you see this, which ratifies everything that I'm saying when we talk about the here in Los Rios and Los Lagos. And obviously what we can see is that there will be an increase of the size of the herd, of their size, and the intensification. So we have a possibility to grow in the supply of good calves in very good condition. And maybe in this, we can also have this in the other areas. When we look at this possibility, from the University Austral of Chile, from the veterinary and science faculty in 2014, I would even say before this, where we were looking at what are some of the problems that each one of these links would have, which are participating in the meat that comes from the dairy, especially the males. And we wanted to find, from our personal practice and from different meetings, to find people in the farms and producers to be able to visualize and to have this knowledge very clear of where is the diagnosis of the problem. We saw something that was a high cost of the artificial rearing. I don't need to explain this to the dairy. They have a negative profit because it's very high technical sensitivity. And many times it has to do with incidence of diseases, mortality. And also there is another structure that they've had a growth of their field due to the response of their prices of an increase in the population. So this means a whole lot more retention of the females that we need to rear her, and the physical space and the resources are limited. So therefore, what has happened because of this is that the male will be pointed out as a subproduct, and this subproduct means it's going to be raised as a subproduct, maybe poorly or an early culling. It could be giving them away when they are born, but when we talk about giving them away when they are born, that would not be a problem because the problem of the males of this high costs process, high sensibility in another field. So therefore, it's not a solution for our chain. So here we were able to change this scheme and turn this around. And we did a protocol in the handling and the nutrition. Then I'm going to show you in a few slides to be able to reverse this male that was like a subproduct, but now he's an animal that can be considered as something profitable, be inserted inside the meat chain in a good way. And this is how we just developed this rearing process, in which has been a technological development. That means to wean them very early and put them in a stimulation for growth in the rumen. And then we have a calf that has a very good weight gain of 1 kilo per day. And we try to have 200 kilograms at a very short time, which would allow us to insert it inside of the meat chain with certain changes of the information of the animal. And this way we can optimize and utilize one of the physiological stages of the growth of the bovines, which is the initial stage that has to go linear. And this also allows us to have a metabolic programming in these animals so that they can increase their meat in a proper way. This is a central element. We're talking about any kind of development that occurs from what happens in the dairy males has to have this all. We have to look at all these links. We have to look at the herd in the dairy farm. We have to innovate what is the rearing that we're using for these dairy calves, and then finally get into this on-grow, so that the growth of these animals, and this is one of the big advantages that we have in the south of Chile, but at the same time, the farmers will know exactly is the limitations that we also have, is the seasonality in our production. In the pasturing system would make our weight gain, our growth will not be constant in time, will not be high in time. We have a long cycle, not only in the first stage, but also in the on-grow. We have very long cycles. And the animals that are coming from the dairy farms, the males that come from the dairy farms, would make this be not very efficient. So since they're not so efficient with a low profitability and a lot of maintenance costs for a long time, it also makes us have some kind of to find the profit at the initial costs. When we're talking about replacement weight, that way you pay less for the rearing, and so it's a negative. So we have to break these barriers and start with animals that can have good quality and allow us for the domestic market or for export. So what is happening in the practice? Many farmers can draw up their growth curve of their different steers, and you will find this very same curve where we have a stage of the calf, 60 days, a little bit more. These are for the spring calving. We can also see the calving in different areas, but where more calves that we are having theoretically is during the time of spring, especially in the dairy farms. And these animals will arrive at the spring and they are taken out of this paddocks in a very early stage so that they can have, in many times they are with just pasturing and no supplement. And we know what happens in the summer. In the last part of the last years here in Chile, it has been very strong to have bad pastures. So the response in general of the meat cow, if there's not availability, there's no quality, and so you have zero weight gain. So once again, we have a decrease of the gainings of these. So these animals during the summer, they are very complicated, and in the fall or in the winter, we know that the conditions here, the climate conditions, the low resources that we have for the pasturing management, many times there's mortality and a low growth. So in the best of the cases, we have a good rearing, around 200, 250 kilos per year. That's more or less what we are calculating in all of the farms. So this is a very late delay in the growth, so that makes our cycles be much longer. It appeals so much with the compensatory weights in the second spring, but we know that this is short. But this also makes the spring be very variable. There are some years that we have 60 days, other days we have 90 days, and sometimes, and then we go into the 15th of December and deficiency of, so once again, we have slow growth. And finally, we arrive with the steers, and it's very normal that we would, when we do the engros with these dairy calves, and they are a whole lot older than we would expect. So at this point, as a research from the Australian University and the work that we are carrying out, we have developed a system where we said, okay, we cannot of this better biological increase and what we need to do for our animals for their future development. And we developed a feeding diet and handling where we can have 200 kilos at 180 days, obviously with the dairy calves with the Holstein or the Friesen. And these animals would allow us to have one step forward, to come with an animal who would come in very good shape with 200 kilograms, but a whole lot of 200 kilograms, and they can develop very well during the engros stage. So we can have this as an objective, to have a return of the incomes, to use this animal to reduce the use of hand labor and have more animals inside the process, which is the center element of any kind of profitability in the livestock production. So our objective is this, about 2 or 3 years of research, is to create a model, an innovative model of rearing, which has been very well consolidated. And today it has been transferred to the productive parts. It has been growing, but today we have the challenge of changing this way of rearing in a more efficient way, and to have animals from the spring. We can probably get them out even earlier, but with our system, with this combination that we have with the pasturing, and to reduce the cost and be more efficient in certain areas, starting from the strategic supplement, we can have animals at 21 or 22 months in the case of the spring. In the fall or the winter, we can get them out due to the initial that we see during the time of the calving. And, they have to be under roof. So what are the keys that we have that we can use for the production is to have this goal, is to have younger animals, a whole lot more efficient in our livestock. The basis is to start with an animal of 200 kilograms at 6 months. If we start based on this, with 200 kilograms, there's nothing to do. We have to convince and make a good business with the dairy farms, or try to find an alternative like the Frigorífico Osorno, to be able to find the alternative of generating animals, or to generate rearing models which would allow us to insert these animals with these characteristics. Now, our first point has to do with to develop the rumen as soon as possible, that he can use a very good quality forage, and this will be done nutritionally, and also program these animals for the meat quality when we talk about the adipose tissue in the near future. And when we talk about the angro or the re-rearing, is to give them as much pasturing as possible and to optimize the pasturing given and so that they can grow as much as they possible when we have this time where we can do it. To work very closely with the quality and the amount of ensilage that we have available. This is very, very important. We need to have the pasturing ensilage, and also as something as a supplementation strategy, and this to have a lineal growth, where we need to program not just the initial rearing growth, but also have a food available and a strategy which is associated with a permanent weight in this stage, so that it can be an efficient system and arrive at our goal. And something that is very key is that we need to improve our commercial relationship if we want to have an efficient model. So the inter-farm, there also has to be a response from the commercial and the producer, so we can have it in the long time. At the beginning, this is fundamental. In the males, we have to give them the possibility of the restriction to the milk, because the milk is obviously fundamental at the beginning, because they cannot consume. I'm not going to do nutritional speech right now. I'm not going to bore you with that, but we need to give them food starting with the milk, obviously. But finally, what we need to do is we need to develop this rumen, and we need to have a concentrate that is proper with the different nutrients, about a nutritional balance. And here what we have basically done is to develop our production system, which is V2Luz, which I'm sure many of you know, which the idea is to improve the rumen, but at the same time, this generates this possibility of using this program, which is the metabolic program, the adipocytes, the hyperplasia of the adipocytes, the forming of the adipocytes, which will be done in the last quarter of the gestation, and the intermuscular fat, which is very, very important to have tenderness in the meat and give good taste. This should be done in the last quarter of gestation and also in the first part of the rearing. This is a critical point where we can determine what we're going to have at the final stage. So if we do a very good rearing in these animals, and we don't treat it as a subproduct, but we treat it as a calf that's going to help in our production center, then at the end, we're going to have a product with 45, 50, or 60 days postpartum. We can have a very good quality of meat and a very good formation for our markets, so that the slaughtering plants can find a market for them. So therefore, in the summer, and this has to do with the concept of the strategic supplementation. This depends on each farm, but these are the results that I am summarizing, and I am finally at the end it's available to everyone in the livestock area, is to download the guidelines that we have for production, and all of the results. So we have a research after many, many years, which is a reference guide. It's not a recipe. As a nutritionist, I avoid the recipes because each farm is different, but the concept is this. Under these summer conditions, where we have some animals that don't have anything available, with the GDP, which is limited. So what we need to do, we have to good quality supplementation to give the basis of the forage to supply the deficiency that we have in the pasturing. But at the same time, we need to have nutritional strategies. We have tried many different alternatives, and we have calibrated where is our critical points with some diets of 2 kilograms of growth concentration with different nutrients and different vegetative sources, mainly, and minerals, obviously, where we can have with 2 kilograms or 2 kilograms and a half in a very simple way in the paddock, which allows us to maintain our daily weight gain, which is our central axis for the growth in our system. So we need to stimulate this. We need to program this. What this means, maybe we need to start at the 15th of January, or maybe if in some opportunities we can say, okay, we're going to win 60 grams during February and part of it in March. In the fall and the winter, this is another very complex situation. This is highly associated with the animal load. When we don't do it correctly, we don't have a good forage balance, then this is what's going to determine what will be our limit of what we can achieve in the animal load. So also this supplement should not only have an effect of keeping the daily weight gain, but also to be able to sustain a higher animal load, which could be more positive with the spring growth. So I think here in this equation of the cost benefit, it also should involve to keep as many animals as we can on our farm. In this, we need to do a trial, trying different feed than what we did with the previous stage, because here what we are requiring is a feed that can replace the dry period, can fill the animals, if you want to allow me this word, but which can satisfy the growth. 650 grams per day which is our goal, like you can see in this picture. In this spring, where we need to do a very good pasturing management, there are certain recommendations of the coming in, going out. The dairy farmers are going to understand me very well. The difference of the dairy, when you do a pasturing with very poor quality, immediately they're going to see it in the tank. But in the meat farms, since there's not constant weigh, you see that these animals are not accusing, but they're accusing us at the end. Instead of gaining 1 kilogram a day on average during the spring, we are gaining 900 or whatever. And I think this is very, very important to incorporate a constant weighing, because with these electronic devices, which would allow us to monitor these individuals. And this would also mean, together with there's a recommendation which has to do with the availability of the pasturing in the springtime, hopefully not lower than 1,500 kilograms. With this, we are guaranteeing a normal pasturing in the ryegrass, which is close to 1 kilogram, because it would be very effective once we drop this availability, since there are no more leaves and we're eating more than neutral. So this is going to reduce the growth, it's going to be affected. So it would be better to have it over this amount. And this we can generate a rebound, which is perfect for this time. Here I have put these two elements together, which is the summer and the on-grow, or the growing period, because these are very complex. Because that last summer, when they have about 400 kilograms, more or less. First of all, if there's availability in the yard, we can accelerate this process. And if you have this resource, you can do it. But many times there isn't. So what we recommend here is we want to generate a supplementation with a pasturing ensilage or pre-on-grow, not the final on-grow, with the concentration we need for finishing for their on-grow. And it can be something very simple. You can see these dry summers plus an ensilage with good quality. We can have a growth of 900 kilograms in the latest stage of the animals, when their corporal condition is now it cannot be a maintenance diet, but it has to have more cereals to be able to create this kind of weight gain. And then finally, the on-growth stage, where clearly the cost of the ration is a whole lot higher, since if I don't use this, then I'm going to use everything I did previously. So what I'm going to do here is change where this stage is going to create a higher growth, but with a very high cost, but it's necessary to be able to finish off normally. So this is how our trial that you will be able to see once you download the manual. You can see this model that I have been talking about, but also the trial from the neurologist. And also we had some animals of 22 to 23 months and with some channels of 260 kilos. And this is what we were expecting. 2 for the fat coverage and 1 for this fat coverage of some of these animals. But what's interesting about this system is it allows us to be flexible. And we can say, okay, we need an animal with more time out in the patio. We can do it. Obviously, the cost production might merit this, but we have this flexibility because we have young animals. Because if we go to 30 months, we can't do it because we can't have them eternally, and they will not have a good quality. These are young animals, so they're flexible to be able to do this system. In fact, it could be even more intense, but we need to research it depending on the costs that they would have, each producer, according to what they have available. These are the economic results, as you can see in a year and a half ago. You can see how completely different it is, but you can see this structure because the costs have increased significantly in the supply of inputs, the raw material, etc. So there is a relationship. It's always very difficult to play with the margins, but we have the margins over the feed. This is over the feed cost. It depends on the production or the costs that we can make it a little bit more precise, but we have the margin, what we traditionally have. But we need to have a return before with optimizing the infrastructure, and this makes all of this together for this system to be more efficient. We can summarize it as a UH model. That means in the fall we can have animals at 18 to 19 months that we have in some of our commercial farms, and in the spring at 22 months, completely adequate. And these are being sustained between 800 and 1,000 kilograms of grains or concentrates. And this, we can have a more efficient model and better productions to be able to get our animals, our dairy animals, not as a subproduct, but they can be inserted in the meat chain. Finally, I think that all of the work that we have carried out together with the meat production, especially I want to thank the governor from Los Rios for this long-term encouragement that he has given for this research. Today we have started a commercialization process, and hopefully I can tell you about this one day. We want to have these crossbreeds that we were talking about. Camila, who's going to talk about this, she's going to talk about some of these general alignments. We can insert these, we can avoid these animal welfare, and our focus is productive, but also the animal welfare is to have good practices. We have all of the protocols, but also this has to be a business for the dairy farms. And if we can generate an attractive model which would allow us to rear correctly, insert them inside this meat chain, and come with a high quality meat at the end of the process, then we can have something permanent in time. And this is our main purpose as the research from the University of Stock. To use the daily weight gain is fundamental, a good pasturing, and also they know how to use the supplementation. And finally, I think what I have repeated is to implement these production models, which would allow us to integrate us in a very positive way between the dairy producers and the meat producers for our livestock and for our farmers in general. This was my presentation. Thank you so much for the time, and it will be available if you look at the science faculty. So I invite you to study our guidelines and download it and look at it and see if there's any kind of changes in our livestock. Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you so much, Emilio. There are some questions in our chat. Horacio Pavés is asking, have you considered replacing the ensilage for hay in the rations? It depends on the objectives that you have in the initial stage, up to 200 kilograms. Obviously, our recommendation is to use only hay as the forage during this stage of rearing. I want to go into details about this, but there the hay is fundamental. The hay at the beginning of the first 6 months is basically our recommendation to do it with hay, hopefully with a good quality hay. But the second part of the second stage, the hay can also obviously be part of the complement, but it necessarily we need to give some feed with a better quality. And this has to do with an early harvesting, which goes hand in hand with the ensilage more than the hay. But this could be an alternative. Maybe on the on-grow, we can also incorporate it, especially as a good fiber source. So this is flexible. But basically, in the initial stage, the hay is fundamental, and we have to then evaluate the other. Another question, is it competitive to do nutritional handling in these dairy farms, dairy cows, versus a meat animal? What has been your experience in the university in this sense? Your question is very interesting. The dairy animal has a very important possibility of growth because of the breed, the Holstein or the Jersey. We have not taken the research in that line yet due to the fact of the difference of the growth potential for the traditional animals of the dairy farms of the medium and small size, and the producers who have gone back to the Holstein. In the development of the dairy sector, the growth of these animals is 1 kilogram per day because they come with from big cows, big bulls, medium to big, and they have the potential growth per day. And what this means is that if we give them the right kind of nutrition handling, we can obtain cows that will have these characteristics. From the point of view of meat quality, the evaluations that we have done of fatty acids, which is also available in our guidebook, makes us think of a lean meat or extra lean, which are very proper for the domestic market, and some that are concerned about eating so much fat. So obviously they are tender because they're very young, and they're the nutritional handling in the last stage of the on-grow, of the transport, and also the pre-mortis. If we do all of this correctly, we would not have any problems with these animals. They have the right kind of meat with a lot of very tender, and this would allow us to use this niche as the kind of meat that we would prefer. If you look at it from the yields of these slaughter, many times these animals are not made up as the meat animals when we talk about this kind of structure. But at the end of the day, if we can have a system with younger animals and they are projecting with a higher growth rate, in fact, we can have a growth rate which would be very important with a higher weight, which can be very attractive for the industry. From the point of view of improving the information, It can be easy. I don't know if easy, but it's a process that's coming, which would be crossing more significantly what we are doing and more systematic and incorporating in the dairy farms with crossing them with one of the meat cows. So this way we can have specific breed for this improvement in the way that they make up and maybe the meat quality, depending on the type of lines that we're going to use. But yes, we can improve it, but also improve it. But obviously, if you have bigger animals, they also respond very close to the supplementation strategy. If we have a more traditional system of only pasturing, where the animals have a very small supplementation based on ensilage, in fact, in other more southern regions, obviously the meat animal would have more advantages in the pasturing systems with less intensity for the growth. Thank you very much. There was another question, but I think that we have already given an answer regarding this, about your opinion about the finished crossing of the dairy animals. Do you think that this practice will be a methodology that can be used more broadly in the medium term? Of course. I think that we are carrying out a project of evaluation with ABS in this case. There are some other companies that have this same assessed genetic programs. But finally, I think that the effect of crossing on the dairy animals, but we know what will be the results. We have to consolidate it as a system, because I think that the industry, one of the big problems that the industry has today is the size, this very little homogenization Andrea mentioned. Hopefully we can have a more homogeneous product, because when we buy animals, they are not homogeneous animals, they are loin homogeneous. So if we can have a system which is more standardized, where we can produce animals that have certain characteristics more in volume, I think this would be important. And if we continue what other countries are doing who are ahead of us of this, of the dairy males, the dairy sector would have a whole lot, because they can do this artificial insemination and it's 100%, and they have a lot of success in doing this. So when we have semen which has been tried and proved with the characteristics of easy calving, and this has been proven, and then they have a better growth, this will be fundamental. And not only that, I think incorporating in the medium term in a more massive way, due to the improvements that the fertility has and the use of the semen, will allow us, together with the genetic selection, our nucleus, and have a replacement and have a very significant space to incorporate them into the meat chain. And this is where we need to have business models that we can absorb these animals in a very efficient way and rear them properly, and we can commercialize them. I think in the near future, we should not try it and from semen that's cheaper. No, we can have a 40% of this, maybe even a little bit more of the tried semen, but obviously with the strategy to be able to cross these animals, which will not be replaced in the dairy farms. Thank you. That's very good news. We have a request from Carlos Líder. If you could repeat this information, where they can unload it. The presentation will be on the platform of Sago. Also, the Meat Corporation also will have the presentation. But also, we would ask Dr. Martínez if you could repeat your data where they can communicate with you, your information. From the University of Charla, Chile, my email is Emilio Martínez at uh.cl. You put that there in any search and it will come directly to me, and you can unload it in 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Since there's no more questions, we're going to give our sincere Thanks to Dr. Martinez for his excellent presentation that he has given us, and for the generosity of sharing all of your experience and your knowledge in an area that is in development still. It's an area that still has a lot more that he can contribute. Saying goodbye to Dr. Martinez, we'll do a brief break to talk about this subject.